In Hong Kong, desire was never neutral. It was profitable, temporary, and easily replaceable. And for a brief moment in the early 1990s, one woman embodied that truth more clearly than anyone else: Amy Yip. She was everywhere: movie posters, magazine covers, box office hits. Her image sold tickets without explanation. Her presence alone guaranteed attention. To the public, she represented confidence and fantasy. To the industry, she represented something far simpler: a product that worked. But behind that visibility was a question no one wanted to ask. What happens to a woman when an entire system only values her for how she looks, not who she is? Fame arrived fast, but respect never followed. Roles multiplied, yet depth vanished. The more she was desired, the more narrowly she was defined, until the image became a cage disguised as success. And then, without scandal, without collapse, without any moment the audience could point to, the calls stopped. The industry did not push her out, it simply lost interest. How does someone disappear when millions still recognize her face? This is not a story about downfall through excess or self-destruction. It is a story about expiration, about how Hong Kong cinema builds fantasies with precision and abandons them with equal efficiency. Seen by everyone, understood by no one, Amy Yip became a symbol of a system that confuses desire with value and silence with closure. This is the story of how being wanted by millions still wasn't enough to be allowed a future. Before she became a fixation, before her image saturated Hong Kong billboards and cinema screens, Amy Yip entered Hong Kong cinema without a master plan and without control over what she was about to become. The late 1980s and early 1990s were a period when the industry was expanding aggressively, chasing quick profits through spectacle, novelty, and desire. And in that environment, her body was noticed before her voice, her curves before her range, her presence before her personhood. She did not create the fantasy that followed her. The system created it around her, refined it, repeated it, and sold it back to the public until it became inseparable from her name. Posters, camera angles, promotional interviews, and film roles all reinforced the same message. This was not an actress being introduced, but an image being launched. Every appearance narrowed the frame further, teaching audiences what to expect and teaching the industry what to demand. Was this fame, or was it a contract with an expiration date already written into it? Success arrived quickly, but it arrived one-dimensionally, leaving no space to experiment, to fail safely, or to be ordinary. The more attention she received, the less flexibility she was allowed, until her career stopped being something she shaped and became something that happened to her. In that moment, what looked like opportunity was already containment, and what felt like recognition was quietly turning into a role she would never be permitted to outgrow. At the height of her visibility, Amy Yip appeared to have everything the Hong Kong film industry promised to those it favored: constant exposure, reliable box office appeal, and a level of name recognition that made her instantly marketable. Yet beneath that surface, there was a stark absence that defined this phase of her career: respect. In Hong Kong cinema of the early 1990s, desire was treated as a shortcut to success, but also as a ceiling, and once an actress was placed inside that frame, escape became nearly impossible. Interviews focused less on craft and more on appearance, less on intention and more on measurements, reducing public conversation to spectacle while quietly stripping away credibility. Roles multiplied but remained shallow, repeating the same visual promise without allowing growth. And every new project reinforced the same unspoken agreement: as long as she embodied fantasy, she would remain visible. What happens when recognition replaces dignity? The industry mistook demand for validation, assuming that popularity absolved it of responsibility. And because audiences kept watching, the system never felt compelled to evolve the roles it offered. Fame in this context became a form of containment, locking her into a single identity that generated profit while preventing transformation. Even as film succeeded, there was no path toward redefinition, no opportunity to be taken seriously beyond the image that sold tickets, and no incentive for studios to risk audiences seeing her differently. Being seen everywhere did not mean being heard anywhere. The contradiction was cruel. The more famous she became, the less authority she had over her own narrative. And the louder her image grew, the quieter her voice became within the system that benefited from it. There were no safeguards against burnout, no conversations about longevity, and no acknowledgement that a career built solely on desire would eventually collapse under its own limitations. Was success supposed to feel this fragile? In a culture that conflated sex appeal with disposability, respect was never part of the transaction, and once an actress was categorized, the industry treated that label as permanent. This was not overt hostility. It was indifference masked as opportunity, a polite exploitation that required no confrontation because it was normalized. And while the public consumed the fantasy without questioning its cost, the system quietly prepared for its next iteration, ready to replace rather than reconsider, leaving her trapped between visibility and vulnerability, celebrated yet constrained, famous yet fundamentally unsupported. The end did not arrive as rejection, it arrived as silence. For Amy Yip, the most decisive moment in her career was not a failed film or a public scandal, but the quiet realization that the system had begun to look past her. In Hong Kong, trends shift quickly, and in the early to mid-1990s, the appetite that once elevated her image started searching for something newer, younger, and just as easily packaged. There was no meeting to explain the change, no plan to transition her into different roles, no acknowledgement that a career built on desire requires a bridge to something else. The phone calls slowed, then stopped, and with them disappeared the illusion that fame provided any form of security. What happens when an industry that built you on visibility decides you are no longer worth seeing? The idea of an expiration date was never spoken aloud, but it governed every decision, turning popularity into a countdown rather than a foundation. Because her image had been defined so narrowly, there was no alternative lane to move into. The very fantasy that created her success now prevented reinvention. Studios did not reject her outright. They simply moved on, a method far more efficient and far less accountable. In Hong Kong cinema, replacement is easier than responsibility, and when an actress no longer fits the marketable frame, the system does not adapt the frame, it discards the subject. This was not cruelty in the obvious sense. It was indifference operating at scale. Who is responsible when opportunity evaporates without explanation? As roles vanished, so did the public narrative around her, and absence was quickly mistaken for choice, as if disappearance were a personal decision rather than an industrial outcome. The industry rewrote the story by omission, allowing audiences to assume she had stepped away, while never acknowledging that there had been nowhere left to step. The machinery that once amplified her image now treated her as a completed cycle, a product that had reached the end of its shelf life. Fame proved to be temporary, but the consequences were not. Without a pathway forward, without institutional support, and without the chance to redefine her value beyond desire, the end came quietly and conclusively. This phase exposed the most uncomfortable truth of all. The system did not fail her accidentally. It functioned exactly as designed. It built a fantasy, extracted maximum value, and when the returns diminished, it erased the evidence by simply turning its attention elsewhere. What followed was not a comeback plan, a negotiation, or a public explanation, but a decision that ran against everything the Hong Kong film industry expects from a star: withdrawal. For Amy Yip, stepping away was not framed as rebellion or protest. It was an act of self-preservation. After years of being defined by an image she did not control, and a market that no longer wanted to adapt, disappearance became the only remaining form of agency. There was no scandal to close the chapter, no dramatic farewell tour, no attempt to rebrand herself for a system that had already decided her limits. What does it mean when leaving becomes the safest option? In Hong Kong, visibility is currency, and choosing invisibility is often interpreted as failure. But this reading ignores the context that made staying untenable. The silence that followed her exit was not emptiness. It was distance. Distance from the gaze that had consumed her, from the expectations that had narrowed her identity, and from an industry that had never offered a future beyond desirability. Living more privately, avoiding publicity, and refusing to re-enter the cycle of speculation were not signs of defeat. They were boundaries. Disappearance in this case was not loss. It was control reclaimed. The contrast is telling. When the industry stopped calling, that silence was harmful. When she chose silence herself, it became protective. This distinction exposes how power operates. Who controls the narrative and who bears the cost when it ends? Without the constant demand to perform, the image loosened its grip, but the residue remained. Years of being reduced to a single trait do not dissolve overnight. They linger in how a person is remembered, discussed, and categorized long after they leave the frame. Choosing not to return does not erase what was taken, yet it interrupts the mechanism that would have continued taking. In a culture that celebrates resilience only when it is visible and profitable, opting out is treated as disappearance rather than refusal. But refusal is precisely what this moment represents. By declining the familiar script, the forced reinvention, the nostalgic cameo, the carefully managed return, she denied the system one last opportunity to monetize her past. Is withdrawal still failure if it preserves dignity? The industry prefers endings it can package. Her exit offered none. It provided no spectacle, no lesson easily consumed, only a quiet assertion that not every story needs to continue inside the same machine that created it. In choosing a life away from the spotlight, she stepped out of the role written for her and into a space the industry could not access. The cost of that choice was invisibility. The benefit was autonomy. And in an environment where being seen had always meant being used, not being seen became the clearest form of survival. What happened to Amy Yip was never an isolated outcome. It was the predictable result of a system that has repeated the same pattern for decades. In Hong Kong cinema, female desirability has long been treated as a renewable resource, endlessly replaceable, instantly marketable, and structurally disposable. The industry excels at manufacturing fantasies, but it has little interest in maintaining the people behind them once those fantasies lose commercial efficiency. For women whose careers are built primarily on erotic appeal, there is rarely a second framework waiting. No transition into authority, no recalibration of roles, no institutional support for reinvention. Why is longevity considered a privilege for men, but a liability for women? Male actors age into mentors, leaders, or symbols of legacy, while female icons are expected to remain frozen in the moment that made them profitable. When that moment passes, the system does not renegotiate value. It withdraws attention. This mechanism allows the industry to deny responsibility by framing disappearance as personal choice rather than structural exclusion. In reality, the choice is often illusory, a response to shrinking space rather than an act of freedom. Amy Yip's withdrawal exposes this illusion clearly. Her silence was read as retreat, but it was shaped by an environment that offered no dignified continuation. The machine does not need cruelty to function. It relies on indifference, speed, and constant replacement. New faces arrive, new fantasies are sold, and old ones are quietly archived without reflection. How many women vanish this way without ever being named as casualties? By refusing to confront this pattern, Hong Kong's film industry preserves the myth that success is purely individual and failure is personal. But Amy Yip's story dismantles that narrative. It shows how gendered expectations narrow possibility, how desire becomes confinement, and how silence becomes the industry's preferred method of closure. This was not a tragedy caused by excess, scandal, or miscalculation. It was the outcome of a machine operating exactly as designed: efficient, profitable, and emotionally indifferent. And until that design is questioned, the same cycle will continue, producing icons quickly, discarding them quietly, and leaving behind lives that no longer fit the fantasy they were never allowed to outgrow. In the end, the most unsettling part of Amy Yip's story is not how loudly she rose, but how quietly everything ended. There was no scandal to dissect, no public implosion to replay, no final scene the industry could point to and say this is where it went wrong. The story simply faded, as if disappearance itself were a natural conclusion rather than a consequence. She was seen by millions, desired by an entire era of Hong Kong cinema, yet understood by almost no one beyond the image that was sold. And when that image no longer served a purpose, the system did what it always does best. It moved on without explanation. What does it say about an industry when being wanted is never enough to be protected? Amy Yip did not lose her place because she failed, but because the role written for her had no future attached to it. By choosing a life away from the spotlight, she reclaimed something the industry never offered: control over her own narrative. That choice came with a cost: invisibility. But it also marked a refusal to keep participating in a cycle built on consumption and replacement. Is stepping away really disappearance, or is it the only way to survive with dignity? Her silence is often mistaken for absence, yet it speaks louder than any comeback ever could. It exposes a truth the industry prefers to keep buried: that desire is profitable but disposable, and that women who are reduced to fantasies are rarely allowed to age, evolve, or redefine themselves on their own terms. This is not a story about regret or nostalgia. It is a story about boundaries, about what happens when someone chooses not to let a system take any more than it already has. Amy Yip did not vanish because she had nothing left to give. She vanished because staying would have meant giving up the last thing that mattered: herself. And in an industry that confuses visibility with value, that quiet exit remains the most powerful statement of all.